insights and allow people to have conversation about it. And I always learn things. You even got quoted in the sermon Sunday. So you just never know where that might be. But I was going to preach on the 14th chapter of John, but as I was traveling through the Holy Land, and as I was contemplating what our seniors need to hear, we have 34 graduating seniors. Anybody have a senior this year? All right, bless you. And I'm going to be talking about, it's going to be some advice for parents and some advice for students. So I'll really be talking to the parents and the students, and I hope everyone else will observe that. But we have 34 graduating from high school and 22 the college graduates that we know about. If you have any other college graduates that haven't signed up, please let us know. We're trying to include their name in the bulletin, and we have pictures of the high school seniors, so that should be good. So the 23rd Psalm, I thought it was something that they ought to take with them. I thought it was something they ought to have memorized. And if you're here a week early, you think that Bob Rathman's speaking, we're glad you're here anyway. And I hope that you come back to hear him next week, which is my 36th wedding anniversary. So it should be a good day. I got home from the Holy Land on Friday afternoon. I called my mother. And after I called my mom, she was her regular self. She'd gone to the pool that morning. And then when I called her on Saturday, she's a longtime nurse and never complains. She had a gangrenous gallbladder 10 years ago, and she didn't know there was a problem until we put her in the hospital. I mean, she just has high pain tolerance. And so when my mother says, take me to the doctor, I know something is wrong. So Saturday when I called, she's like, I've got to go to urgent care. We took her to urgent care, and they said, your mother is yellow, and you need to go to the ER. So, it's funny. You sit next to someone in the car, you don't realize that. But the moment I looked at her, I knew that she was quite jaundiced. Took her over to St. Joe's, and they did a great job. We spent, 12 hours in the ER waiting for a room. But when we finally got a room, they were just wonderful and so helpful. And she had a procedure yesterday that went well. And I'm going to head over there as soon as we're done today. Just to check and see where we are. So that's where my life has been. And as I put this together on Sunday afternoon while I was in the hospital room, I think you're getting more travelogue today than you are lesson. So I appreciate your forgiveness in advance for that. I've got a great picture here from the Wallaces. If you haven't seen, kind of back one, maybe. Where'd it go? Oh, did I add that later? Did it not show up? Okay, I don't have a great picture of the Wallaces. I have a picture of the baby, but this is from a wedding I did the Saturday before we left. Two of our friends from Grayson were going with us on this trip, and a few weeks ago, their mothers called me and said, would you marry us? And I said, it's a pretty busy time. I'm teaching a Sunday school class all weekend, and then it turned out we had a funeral that Saturday afternoon, so I had a Sunday school class, then a funeral, and then I had to drive out to Gwinnett County to do a double wedding. The weirdest thing about this wedding is, if you probably can't see it, but this, can you look at the date? Given under my hand and seal. Can anybody read that? 8th of May, 1992. They got the marriage certificate 31 years ago and finally tied the knot. The interesting thing is, in the state of Georgia, your marriage certificate, your marriage license does not expire. So if you're hopeful about anything, just go get one and have it on hand, and then it will be available for you 31 years later. And so my friend Jenny and Sean, Jenny's mom married her longtime beau, and Sean's mom married her newer beau, and it was great to be able to celebrate with them. But I just thought that was a keepsake right there. 31 years. Anybody have a courtship that long? No, not even close. So sometimes the only scripture we have is the scripture we have memorized. We were out in the shepherd's field in Bethlehem, and Don Harrison, one of our members, some of you know Don. Don told me that he, every Christmas, he sits down with the family and shares with them the Christmas story from memory. So I decided to call his hand and say, okay, well, if you have the Christmas story memorized, let's share Luke 2 while we're there in the shepherd's field. And I was in tears. It was just a beautiful thing as he was able to share from memory. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world would be enrolled. And you can't imagine what it was like to be there in the shepherd's field out there just outside of Bethlehem with him sharing that. And it was a beautiful time, and we were able to have communion there together in that place. So sometimes the only scripture we have is a scripture that is in our memories, and we're able to hold on to that. I remember when my father died and I came out of the church, my home church up in Pennsylvania, in the midst of all the mountains, and I started reciting to myself, I look to the hills, from where does my help come? My help is in the Lord, who made heaven and earth. I used to drive down 400 from Roswell. We lived off 92 there off Holcomb Bridge, and I had a 14-mile commute from my house in Roswell to Peachtree Road every day, coming through here when we used to have the toll booth. Any witnesses there? And I would come down, and almost every morning I would recite to myself Lamentations 3:22, because what better to do in traffic than lament, right? But Lamentations 3:22 is a beautiful, positive scripture. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. And I had to remind myself of that as I spent sometimes hours in 400 traffic. You know what I mean. So the last several weeks we were in the Holy Land, and it was a beautiful gift. I went to places that I'd never been before. When I was there in 2001, right before September 11th, it was in the midst of an intifada. And because of that, we couldn't go into Jordan. We couldn't go into Jericho. We couldn't go to the shepherd's fields in Bethlehem. There were just so many places that were restricted access that we were not even allowed to go into. And there were tanks and guns everywhere. One of my friends from Sweden, as we were traveling, sent me a note, and he said, Phil, how are you doing with all the protests and all the issues that are going on? And if Robert Stovall was here with me, he'd tell you, we saw none of that. That's like saying, I can't believe you live in Dunwoody with all the things that happen at Perimeter Mall. We did not see any of the issues there in Israel as we were traveling along. We felt very safe. I felt safer than I did the last time that we were there as well. So that was our trip we made our trip to the Holy Land. And what they call it is the fifth gospel. And you learn so much from the land itself. And how many of y'all have been able to go? Anybody? Okay. How many of you want to go a couple of years from now when we go again? David's already planning his next trip. Maybe that's why he's home. He's planning his next trip. But the fifth gospel, David, if you're online, hey. But the fifth gospel is the land. And there are things that you learn by experiencing the land and by seeing the land that you never would have experienced before. I didn't have it in my mind, but if you remember in Kings, where Elijah is taken up into heaven and he drops his mantle there and Elisha picks it up, that place of remembrance is about 2 doors down on the Jordan River from where Jesus is baptized. And so we went to the baptismal remembrance site, which is right next to the Elisha remembrance site. And it just made me think that I had never seen it before, that in a sense, baptism is Jesus receiving the mantle. Just as Elijah hands the mantle, leaves the mantle for Elijah, this is God's mantle being put upon Jesus. And it came alive for me in a way that it never had before. So they call it the fifth gospel. And we were definitely best men on the road. There's a picture of me and Robert Stovall. And we were overlooking the plains of Meggido. The plains of Meggido. And you probably haven't heard much about the plains of Meggido, but the area is called Meggido. And so it is a crossroads where different countries from around the Middle East all come together, from north and south and east. Well, really west. There is no east. East is water. But it is a way where people come together. And so that has always been thought to be the place where the final battle is going to take place, because that's where many armies would take place. We were on one of the high hills that was one of the places that was defended. as we toured the plains of Meggido. One of the other mountains there is Mount Carmel, where there's a battle with the prophets of Baal, and that's just on the other side of the valley. It's one of it's really the largest area of valley, part of the Jezreel Valley there in Israel. One of the things that we got to see was a well that you had to walk into. You got to walk down and get your water, and then you had to walk back up. And it was so sophisticated. You walked down one side of the well and you walked back up the other side. So they had two stairwells woven together into the wall so that you didn't get into the other person's way. I mean, the technology of that time was just fascinating. They had stone mangers there, and they put it together a horse there just kind of to show you what a manger would have been like. We had this idea that a manger would have been a wooden crate, but that's really a German idea. Many of the images that we have of the biblical record have wood in them because the Germans wrote the Bible in the vernacular, and that's why we think of wood. But if you go to Israel, you see there's not a lot of wood. One of the other things I found while I was there, we were in Nazareth, and I just thought this was worth having a picture of. That's on every pack of cigarettes, in Israel. Don't you think that would be great for our cigarettes? Smokers die younger. Anybody smoke when they were younger? Okay. So smokers die younger. I thought, okay, that's pretty much in your face. And it was funny. We had a young man visiting the church this past Sunday. He's with the CDC, and his work is in tobacco abuse and tobacco use prevention. And I showed him that. He's like, send me that picture. I need that picture. So I'm sure that's going to show up in CDC slideshows as well. We also got to go to the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth, where the angel comes and announces to Mary that she's going to have a child. This is the only place I felt unsafe 20 years ago. I felt unsafe there. There was a fight that broke out down the streets, lots of shouting and yelling. And so I felt more unsafe 20 years ago, but it's a beautiful chapel, and they have mosaics from all sorts of other nations that are hanging there as you walk in. This is a much more sedate church. This is the Church of Joseph, and we were down in the Church of Joseph. So you kind of have the Church of Mary and the Church of Joseph. The Church of Mary is beautiful and ornate. The Church of Joseph is very simple. It's a Franciscan church. There's a beautiful stained glass of St. Francis there, and you go down into areas where there was a baptismal font, and this is just one of the beautiful mosaics that is there as well. After we left Nazareth, we went to Tiberias, which is on the Sea of Galilee, and we woke up the next morning to be on the Sea of Galilee, and there's few things better than waking up on the Sea of Galilee and to be able to look out and see the beauty of that space. We toured around the Galilee region for quite some time. And one of the places that we went to see an olive press. And with an olive press, you can see it there. They take the olives and they put them on little trays. The man in blue there is pointing to, there's a fulcrum, and they put the olives in these baskets, and then they put pressure on the olives. And when they put pressure on the olives, the olive oil starts to come out. The first, pressing is the extra virgin olive oil. But what they really wanted us to know is what olive press means. And so the word olive press is the same word as Gethsemane. So when you come down the Mount of Olives and you're in the Garden of Gethsemane, you're in the Garden of the Olive Press. So they would collect the olives from the Mount of Olives, bring them down to that garden at the base of the Mount of Olives, and that is where the olive press was. And so it is Gethsemane, Gat meaning a place of pressing oil, Shemanin, which means oils. And so now you've learned something, at least today, that Gethsemane is the place of the olive press at the foot of the Mount of Olives. And we also found wild locust trees. When you hear about John eating locusts and wild honey, many scholars would say they were not physical little bugs that he was eating. He was not eating bugs for lunch, but he was eating these carob pods. And these pods were called locust beans. And that's what he would have been eating, locusts and wild honey, as opposed to insects. And so you learn a lot from seeing the space. Then we went up to Caesarea Philippi. And on the way to Caesarea Philippi, we stopped at the headwaters of the River Dan. The River Dan is where we get the word Jordan, because Jor means to go down, to flow down, and it was the River Dan. So the River Dan flowing down gets us the word Jordan. So you have the Banyas River and the Dan River and a number of other rivers that come together to form the Jordan, but the Jordan it means the Dan that flows down from the Semitic. I got to sit on the judgment seat there at the River Dan, and what that judgment seat told me is I have gained a lot of weight since I've been here. And so that is really my judgment seat picture. I am working hard to improve that. I've been eating better since I got back, but that picture is sort of my judgment seat picture, and hope you'll hold me accountable to that. Elizabeth's going to be gone for 2 weeks, leaving a week from Friday, a week from Saturday. So she's going to be gone for 2 weeks. So don't try to feed me. I'm going to go on a fast while she's gone and see if I can get back in shape, because that picture was really the judgment seat. And the judgment seat was there at the gate of the city. So you walked into the city, and most things, and there's scriptural references to this, but most issues that had to have someone judge them were done at the city gate. You came into the city gate, someone sat in the judgment seat, and cases were brought to them at the city gate. So we actually got to literally see the judgment seat and to sit in the seat of judgment. Then we went to one of, it didn't feel as evil as the last time I went there. The last time I went there, it was bitter cold, and it was in February. We went to Caesarea Philippi. And Caesarea Philippi was a place where they had worshiped all sorts of other gods. And there they worshiped all sorts of other gods, and there was a temple to Pan, and they sacrificed goats there. They sacrificed children there. I mean, it's just a place that sort of emanates evil. But now it's a state park, and it was a beautiful spring day, and the water was flowing, and people were there with their families. And it was quite the contrast for me from the last time that I was there in the bitter cold of February, and it just sort of seeped evil. And this time you were there on a beautiful sunny day, but you can still see in the relief in the rocks where these monuments are made to other gods. And then you see the rock there in one of the caves, and you hear Jesus say, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." And it's like you're at the gates of hell. So you feel it and see it differently because you're actually there at one of the a place that represents pure paganism and pure evil. We moved down the Sea of Galilee to Capernaum. Jesus did a lot of work in Capernaum, and we were able to see the synagogue that was there in Capernaum. We got to go to the Sea of Galilee. And then this is one of my favorite pictures from the trip. One more. That's the Sea of Galilee. This was a picture that Chris Turner took. What do you think? You can do this with panorama. You might want to do this at graduation, Jeff. This could be fun. You put the graduate in the middle, and then you put it on panorama, and you slowly pan. And after you get past the first person, they run around behind the person who's taking the picture and stand on the other side. And you just keep doing it. And as you do the panorama, you can add the same people back to the other side of the picture. So that's in front of the Sea of Galilee. And you can still see that judgment seat is upon me. I think I left that shirt in Israel.
I think it's with stripes.
Yes. Then there were two men who always wanted to find something of value in the Sea of Galilee. And after a deep drought there, a terrible drought in the Sea of Galilee, they started finding some nails. And when they started finding some nails, they were wondering what the nails were. They looked like ancient nails, and they were able to find this ancient boat. And if you want to see something really incredible, you can go on YouTube. I think it's on National Geographic as well. And you can see them try to unearth that boat, because the minute the boat was exposed to air, it started to disintegrate. And so they had to come and pack it in some sort of foam. And then to transport it, because it was so heavy, they moved it. They couldn't figure out a crane. They moved it along the sea. And so it actually was on the Sea of Galilee some 2,000 years later. So that was an amazing thing. So it gave you some idea of what the boats might be like in Jesus' time. And that was a pretty amazing find. Then we went to Tagba, which is where they celebrate the feeding of the 5,000. If you remember some of our discussions, the feeding of the 5,000 was a miracle that Jesus did among the Jewish people. And there were 12 baskets left over representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And then we went across to where the feeding of the 4,000 happened on the other side. To the Decapolis, the city, the area of the Gentiles, and that's where the feeding of the 4,000 happened. So you feed 5,000 and there are 12 baskets left over, and they feed 4,000 and there's 7 baskets left over, which is this idea of completeness, and that that is the complete number, 7 days of the week, and that the call upon the Jews to really complete their work is to include other ones. Fran, this one's for you. Fran was a little upset a couple of weeks ago that he couldn't find his place in the columbarium. He thought that we had put somebody else in there. And so he came in and he's like, my place is taken. And I'm like, you're one above. You need to take a look. So we found his place, but we were up on Masada. And up on Masada, they had their own columbarium tower. And they also used them for niches for pigeons, but they had their own niches there up on Masada. So you learn so much by actually experiencing the land. We left Masada and went to Qumran, where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you can kind of see the cave that whenever there are caves, what you do when you get to a cave is you throw something into the cave before you go into it. I didn't learn that as a Boy Scout, but I think that's a really good thing. Shepherds know that you don't go into a cave without first disturbing whoever might be in the cave. So this little boy, this little shepherd, threw a rock into the cave, and instead of disturbing an animal, he heard pottery break. And he thought, that is so strange. I don't know what that is. And he went in and he found the broken pottery, and inside he found up scrolls. And he went and he sold one of the scrolls to somebody in town, and he got a lot of money for it. So he decided that the best way to get more money was to tear the scrolls. And the more fragments he could get, the more money he made. But think of what he was doing. And these ancient Old Testament manuscripts were there, and he was ripping them into small pieces to make more money. Just it hurts my stomach just to even think about that. And we went from there. This was on the Mount of Olives, at the base of the Mount of Olives, to commemorate Palm Sunday. There's a beautiful chapel there. And in that chapel, they charge for the restrooms. I think that's what we're going to do to raise some extra money around here. I'm just going to put an offering in the restroom. And there's even a sign there at the top that it says, help us to support this ministry with your thanks. So I'm going to throw that over to the finance committee. Maybe we need to put offerings there. And then as you come down the Mount of Olives, you get this beautiful picture of being able to see the whole city of Jerusalem, and then the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is there where the temple would have been, where the Holy of Holies would have been. And it is sort of a real lesson in futility, because the Jewish people stand at the Wailing Wall, which is really basically the retaining wall for the Temple Mount. And they don't get to go up on the Temple Mount. The Muslims get to go up on the Temple Mount. And we were allowed to go up on the Temple Mount for the first time. But it brought me great sadness as we saw that. This is one of the gnarled trees at the bottom of the Mount of Olives. It's an old, probably a 500-year olive tree. Next slide. That's probably a 500-year-old olive tree. And one of the things in the book of Acts, it says that Jesus was crucified on a tree. And there's some scholars that think instead of a cross that Jesus carried a full cross, they think that he carried the crossbar, and then he was mounted with that crossbar on an old gnarled olive tree. And that's quite an image as well. We went to buy gifts for people, and my favorite thing is that the Turners found this basketball player hidden in all the nativities. I don't know if that's Kobe or who it was, but Kareem. He's hidden there in all of the nativities.
Phil,
Yes.
you said you were sad about something about the Wailing Wall.
So if I'm a faithful Jew, every year, at Passover, I'm making a pilgrimage. I go up to the temple to worship, to make sacrifice, and the temple is destroyed in 70 AD. In more recent years, after different warring groups come in and take over the space, it is controlled by the Muslims, and so there is a mosque on the Temple Mount, and that mosque on the Temple Mount is where the temple, the Hebrew temple would have been. Solomon's temple would have been on that same place. So not only can you can't, only Muslims can go into the mosque, and so there is the holiest place on earth for the Jewish people. Right now, is controlled by Muslims, and most faithful Jews can't or wouldn't even go up there. And so think about, the most important place in your life, John, the most important place in your life. And just think if the sanctuary here is the most important place in your life. I know it's not, but if the sanctuary is the most important place in your life, and the best that you could do is to touch the wall by the dumpster outside. Do you feel how hurtful that might be for faithful Jewish people? And what the faithful Jewish people do is they come and they rock and they read the Torah, they read the Hebrew scriptures, and they lean their head against the wall and they put their prayers in the niches in the wall. And for me, it just is a symbol of futility and pain that I can't get back to where we once were. In fact, all I can do is touch the wall. And the blocks are amazing. I mean, think about blocks the size of these door panels. They're on their side, but that's what the rocks look like. And they lean up against those rocks, and they can't get close to where the temple would be. They can only get to the retaining wall at the base of the temple. Does that make?
Yeah, I got you. I didn't know if you were also talking about sadness that they're seeking something that's no longer valid because Jesus died for them.
I don't know that they would see it that way. Yeah. I mean, I think that
I'm sad for them.
Yes, certainly us sad for them. But for me, there's just a profound sadness that they can't get. That's as close as they can get to the holiest site on earth for them. And it hurts my heart for them that anybody have a home place that's been torn down. Or a home place that somebody else has bought and they're not interested in you even looking inside anymore, or something like that. And it's just I empathize for the Hebrew people who come there faithfully day after day to pray at the Wailing Wall when it's just a wall. It's not even the temple. It's not the Holy of Holies. It's just stone. So it represents something, but for me, it represents loss. And it's like Moses. You remember the story, we got to go and stand on Mount Nebo over in Jordan and look back across to the promised land. And it's the same sort of feeling for me. Here's Moses looking at the promised land and all the possibilities, and then God doesn't let it go because of a mistake that he made earlier in his life. And he's done all this work for the next generation to go. Same thing happens with David. David provides a lot of the resources to build the temple, but he doesn't get to build it. His son gets to build it. And there has got to be some joy that the next generation gets to do it. But there's got to be some hurt and frustration that you don't get to go. Does that make?
Sounds like a good sermon right there.
Yeah, it might be. It might be. And then we walked the Via Dolorosa. And one of the things that happened on the Via Dolorosa, the way of sorrow, the stations of the cross, and we started at the first station of the cross, and I wanted everyone to have crosses to be able to carry. And there was a merchant right outside there, and I went and bought 50 crosses so everyone could hold a cross as they walked the Via Dolorosa. And we looked for those crosses for the next 2 days and couldn't find them anywhere but that one shop. I went back and bought 110 more so that I'd have some to bring back here. And Then we went back the next night to buy, one of the members of the church wanted to buy some more, and we went and tried to buy some more, and that shop was closed. And it was just so weird that we couldn't find these olive wood crosses.
So is that place the origin of the Stations of the Cross?
Yes, that is the origin of the Stations of the Cross. And you start out at, at the stone pavement where, Peter talks about his, is where Jesus is accused and all the things happen. And you walk the stations. Some of the stations are tied into some Catholic stories. There's Veronica. Carl, do you know the story of Veronica and stuff like that? So there are some stories that you may not be familiar with that are tied to the Stations of the Cross, but you walk the Stations of the Cross and it's almost all uphill. And that was the hardest for me. I could go downhill with my Achilles, but uphill was tough. So, but nothing at all like the journey that Jesus must have had carrying his cross.
Just about every Catholic church
has Stations of the Cross. Yeah, and those Stations of the Cross would mirror the Stations of the Cross, but these are on the walls. So there's like a circle, a bronze disc that has Roman numeral 1. And then you walk a little further and there's another bronze disc and it has Roman numeral 2. And you can almost miss them, John, because you're in the midst of shops and commerce and all those kind of things. And it's almost like some of them fade into the background, which
is also
is
a good place for pickpockets.
It's a great place for pickpockets as people stop. But I didn't feel as unsafe this time as I had in the past. And so we walked the Via Dolorosa and made our way to the Tomb of the Holy Sepulchre. It was a Sunday morning and the Greek Orthodox were having a service. And so we had to come back to be able to go in there. But that's just a little bit of my pilgrimage. Sorry to bore you with my
picture of you in the Dead Sea and Speedo.
It's there somewhere. It's there somewhere.
You did go in the Dead Sea.
I did go in the Dead Sea, and it's also a strange phenomenon because you get into the Dead Sea and then you just sit back, and when you sit back, you're floating. You can't go under the water. But if you have a cut in your skin, it burns when you get in, but when you get out the next day, it's totally healed. It was one of the best things I did for my Achilles scar was spend some time in the Dead Sea and putting the mud from the Dead Sea on me.
And you left your towel, didn't you?
I left my towel and I threw away the shirt. And
everything else.
Yeah, I threw everything away.
But it's about as nasty as anything you're ever going to get.
It's probably true. But here's the weird thing. It is receded by about 60, not meters. Yeah. That's right. It's receded by about 60 meters since I was there 20 years ago. It loses about 3 meters of shoreline every year. And so they don't know how long the Dead Sea is going to last because, all sorts of reasons. But now we turn to our lesson for today, and I'll go through that quickly so you have some time to talk around the tables. But this is the 23rd Psalm from the King James, and we will recite it together this morning, and we'll recite it together on Sunday. Some of you know it from memory. You can close your eyes. You don't have to read it with me, but I invite you to read the 23rd Psalm from the King James Version. The Lord is my shepherd, shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Let's stay on that slide for a few minutes. I was going to hear my preaching professor, Fred Craddock, speak, and I had gone one day, and he told these miraculous stories, these incredible stories that all seemed to happen to him, and I was a young preacher, and I said to myself, why don't these things ever happen to me? Why do they always happen to him? And I guess he paid better attention to the world than I did at that time. And I have a way of preparing for preaching. I write out the text by hand, And I live with that text all week. You see me sitting in the back sometimes, I'll have a pad out, and I have the text written out by hand. I write out, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And that helps me to get the text into my soul. That text is a part of me, and I'm living in the text all week. And so I'd gone to hear Fred Craddock one day, and I was headed to see him the next day. And I had the pad in the seat next to me where it said, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I was preaching on it that week. And as I was driving up from Butts County to Covington, I came across a young woman who was running this way, and a white Bronco was speeding away the other direction. And it was just after the OJ thing. So I've got a blonde woman running toward me barefoot, and a white Bronco going the other way. And as I'm wont to do, I stop and pick people up. She looked like she was in distress. And when I picked her up, she got into the car and she started apologizing because of how she looked. And she wiped her brow that was quite oily. And I thought to myself, he anoints my head with oil. She talked about who she was running away from. And it made me hear, he makes me to lie down in a different way. Not in the positive way that this psalm is meant, but I heard it that way because of the abuse that this young woman had gone through. We drove up toward Covington, and I was trying, she was wanting me to take her back close to where she lived. And as we drove up to Covington, we passed one of those little gas stations where I often will buy a Red Link biscuit. Anybody else? Anybody Red Link biscuit? No. Come on, Mallard. You don't like a good Red Link biscuit? That's been sitting under a heat lamp I mean, what more could you want? And so she looked at one of those gas stations, and she said, that guy feeds me. And I thought, he prepares a table before me. I mean, just this whole psalm came alive for me in a way that I'd never heard it before. And then we got to her home, and she offered herself to me as thanksgiving for the ride. And I said, no, that's not who I am. You need to go home. And it was a chance to bless her and to just give her a ride home. And this psalm just came, she was walking through the valley of the shadow of death with this man, but I was able to deliver her safely home. And it was a beautiful thing. And I saw this psalm come alive in a way that I never had before. This psalm is really about what God is doing. It's not about what we do. It's about God making us to lie down in green pastures. Maybe you need some rest. Maybe you need some time to lie down in green pastures. Maybe you need to be led away from distractions by some still waters, not some distilled waters, but some still water as a way to find some time. To have your store resold, to allow God to lead you, to be with you, to comfort you, to prepare a table before you as we'll have communion this Sunday, to anoint your head with oil. This is about what God is doing. And this is the way it comes in the Message. This is not familiar to you. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me in quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I'm not afraid when you're by my side. Your trusted shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head with my cup brims with blessing. Your beauty and love chase after me. Isn't that great? Your beauty and your love chase after me every day of my life. I'm back home in the house of God for the rest of my life. It's the story of the divine shepherd. I'm going to skip through the 2 new RSV ones and those footnotes, but there's a pattern here in the blue one. The worshiper confesses their confidence in God, speaking to a human audience, saying, this is what God is doing to me. And then the worshiper turns and addresses the deity, stressing what God has done, and then again goes back to the human audience and summarizes their assurance of divine favor. This is what God is doing. This is how God has helped me, and then giving thanks for that. I just have a slide in here about the earmark. one of the things that shepherds do is they mark the ears of their animals. And they did this in ancient Israel. The term dates back to the 16th century, but in order to mark your flock, you wouldn't brand them, you would cut their ears, and each shepherd had a certain cut that they would put into the ears to make that sheep their own. And the sheep know the sound of the shepherd's voice. So to set a table, one of the things that I learned is that to set the table was not necessarily a physical table, but you would go and prepare the field. You would go in and you would take out poisonous plants before you let your sheep graze. You would scan for scorpion and snake nests, and you would prepare the table, the land, the mesa, if you will. You would prepare the grazing land for the sheep. And so it's also a shepherding term of preparing the table before. There are lots of different interpretations that God is a skilled and compassionate shepherd who prepares the table. And then old and sickly animals are treated with oil, and they're given a curative drink of herbs and sweetened with honey, that a cup that overflows for the sheep to drink from. So God is both shepherd and a host for the guest. God feeds and cares for us, and God meets the other needs of the guest. There are some other thoughts that this might have been a prayer of sanctuary, so that when you made your way to the temple in Jerusalem, you were safe. And you would dwell in the house of the Lord as long as you live, because if you left the house of the Lord, you might be held accountable for whatever you did or whoever was chasing you, and you found your way into that safe place. And that's why some translations are, I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live, as opposed to forever. These are from Robert and Jared Stovall. This is on the way from Jericho, the lowest place on earth, up to Jerusalem. And they would often call it the valley of the shadow of death. It was a place where you put your life in danger. You remember Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan that happens as he goes from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And it could be the valley of the shadow of death, not just because of what it looked like, but because it was a dangerous place. And this is what the landscape looks like. This is one of the monasteries that is there on the side of the hill. And you can still get refuge there today. If you're walking from Jericho to Jerusalem, you can stop and have lunch, and the 6 monks who live there will take care of you. And then I think this is just a beautiful picture of what it looks like to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. So the land comes alive as you're there. So friends, maybe it's time for you to find some new pastures, a place where you're made to lie down, to take some time, where you're led beside still waters, where your soul is restored, where you're reassured in the face of evil, where you're guided by God's rod and staff, where a meal is prepared before you, a meal of forgiveness that we'll have this Sunday. We haven't had a healing service since I've been here, but at times we'll anoint the sick with oil so that we might dwell with God. So let's go to that second to last side. Might you consider praying Psalm 23 daily until you have it memorized? Could this be your prayer? So you have this piece of scripture to go with you, or maybe you already have it memorized, and so you want to learn another psalm if you already have that one memorized. So these are my questions for you today. Do you have any scripture or poetry memorized? Share what you remember at the table. What is the gift of memorization? When have you experienced God's guiding hand and or God's provision in transitions? Where have you felt led in life? What part of Psalm 23 do you most need today? And the last one is, what would be the equivalent to a shepherd in our culture today? You would say, the Lord is my blank. Choose two and discuss among yourselves. Obviously, I didn't give time for discussion.